Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives. I'm Heidi Kuda. This is episode 136. Today, Jim Hi-Fi and I are interviewing Stephen Lacey. He describes how he was radicalized by Russian propaganda and how he came out the other side and became a virulent critic of Putin's regime, and why he has dedicated so much time and resources to helping the people of Ukraine. Have a listen. Stephen Lacey, I'm so thrilled to introduce you to RadPod's audience. This is very exciting for us. I was able to meet Stephen a week ago. I got to hear him speak at Byline Time's 6th anniversary, and his story is so important. We talk a lot about Russian propaganda and radicalization on this show, but rarely have we talked to somebody who was truly radicalized by going to Russia and, being immersed in the narratives and sort of the mystical culture, and then also further cementing that by becoming part of the Orthodox Church. Of course, now he's been dedicating much of his time and money to rebuking Putin's regime and helping Ukraine. So it's an incredible story. But would you mind sharing with Jim and Hi-Fi and our viewers that basically a summary of what happened to you and how you came out of it? It's such a great, important story.
Sure, and thank you very much. It's great to be here. Someone said to me, "Why do you speak out?" And I think it's really, really important to speak out, because in many ways I was conned for kind of 10 to 15 years. And I'm not stupid and I'm not an idiot, although there are times where I feel stupid, and I'll talk about that in a kind of minute. I'm actually a strategist. So that means I work in advertising and communications, and I'm probably one of the most awarded cultural insight specialists in the UK. So I understand communications, and a lot of the work I did was around behaviour change. So I understand the levers, but I still fell deeply in the rabbit hole and into Russian propaganda and into the darkness of Russian propaganda. And it's a very, very dark and kind of painful world. And in many ways, to kind of go back, you have to go through a lot of self-assessment, which is often very, very painful. It's very, very sad. There's a degree of feeling of like an idiot and feeling kind of stupid and feeling kind of powerless, which in many ways I was at the time. And I think there's a degree of self-loathing. I think it's important this isn't a victim narrative, because the victims are the people of Ukraine, those that have been faced with a genocide, a linguicide, ecocide, and a cultural side, and they're the victims. But I think by speaking out, hopefully we can start learning. I think I'm one of the few people that has spoken out about the journey into Russian propaganda, but hopefully start learning about how we can kind of stop the narratives and what are those point of narratives, and how does it work, and how does it work on the mind. And we're saying that everyone's slightly different, but I think the journey in is really, really important. And as I mentioned, it's 10 years, so I'm going to go in beats. I'm going to go quite fast, and I think that's kind of intentional because there's quite a lot of ground to kind of cover. So it kind of started in 1989. Went on a school trip, went to Russia, just full of kind of communism, and just kind of fell in love with kind of Russian kind of culture, and just thought, this is a country that's changing. It's a country that's kind of different, and it feels like it's on the cusp of something, and it doesn't really feel Western, and it doesn't really feel kind of Asian, and feels kind of different. So from that point, I started really kind of looking at kind of Russian culture and reading a lot of kind of Russian kind of literature, mainly kind of Dostoevsky, but some other people as well. And I think the interesting thing with the Russian soft power, and it's why you have to listen to Ukrainians when they talk about Russian soft power, because it seeps through, and and there's all the narratives there, even in Dostoevsky. In many ways, it's a blueprint for Putinism, because a lot of it comes from 19th century Slavism. So from there, I kind of got kind of fascinated, but it's still kind of just living my kind of life. I used to work in advertising, used to party hard, kind of drink hard, and I used to go to Russia on holiday. So I went to kind of St. Petersburg and went to kind of Moscow. I used to go there to lap up the culture, but also to party hard because it was good fun in the 1990s, and then it was kind of quite wild. And then one day I kind of was very hungover and saw a monastery in St. Petersburg, Alexander Nevsky Monastery, and I thought, well, I'm going to go in and kind of visit and kind of have a look. So I went in and witnessed the liturgy, and at that time I felt that I had to change my life. So I felt that my mum, who died a number of years before, but I never really got over it and kind of blocked it out, was with me, and I felt I had to kind of change my life and turn it around. And at the same time, I'm disabled. I've got what's called a lobster hand. I've got missing fibia, shortening of a tibia, two toes on one and four on the other. So at the same time, I kind of noticed just through my journeys in kind of Russia that disability is kind of frowned upon. It's kind of not really kind of accepted and kind of very kind of hidden. And it goes back to the kind of the Tsar time, but also kind of that whole Soviet idea of there's no disabled in the USSR. So I wanted to do something positive for disability. So I went back to London and discovered the Russian Orthodox Church there, the kind of cathedral. So I went into the kind of cathedral. I'd never been baptized and kind of got baptized into the Russian Orthodox Church. And it is an interesting time because there's a lot of Westerners there, and it kind of split. The church kind of split and got really kind of taken over. So this was a time, 2006, where the Russian state was starting to seize churches. So it's starting to say this is imperialist policy, old imperialist lands. They're doing it in Nice, they're doing it in Brexit, and they did it in London. But I kind of at that time took the Russians kind of side and ended up on the kind of parish council, and I was on parish council of two Russian cathedrals. But the interesting thing was, at first, it kind of opens up your mind, and I think it felt like a new experience. And I was talking about this kind of recently. I think to yourself yesterday, Heidi, that I was in my kind of 30s at this point, and a lot of my friends had kind of settled down, and life just felt a little bit kind of mundane and kind of boring, and I felt quite lonely. Not lonely because I didn't have friends, because I've got lots of friends, but just detachment from something. And I think in many ways, this and that, the concepts of kind of bereavement and misery likes company. I think those two things come in hand. So suddenly I felt in this kind of community, felt kind of very kind of love. And it was opening my mind up to new kind of concepts. So didn't know anything about kind of Byzantine history because you're never taught about that. Didn't know anything about Serbian history and Eastern European in general. So suddenly your mind's kind of expanding. But what you learn is very, very quickly it shuts your mind down because it works like a cult. So you get that buzz and the kind of adrenaline buzz where you feel, wow, it's kind of, I'm learning, this is amazing, I'm in a new place, it's so exciting. And then you're kind of forced into these kind of walls of kind of thinking. And some of the narratives in the church that would be like the Third Rome, this idea that the Rome's kind of fallen under Constantinople, the new Rome's kind of emerging. This idea that the West has always hated kind of orthodoxy, and as a consequence, the West has always hated kind of Russia. Idea that Russia's kind of grown all these kind of churches, and it's kind of idea of kind of Putin as well, kind of being kind of strong leader, very kind of attached to the kind of churches, giving to all these amazing kind of monasteries, the rebirth of kind of monasteries. This idea that you can only really kind of talk to your kind of priest, and the priest tells you what to think and essentially kind of what to kind of feel. So multiple kind of narratives kind of playing, and you've kind of battled with the narratives, but they kind of gradually kind of grab you. And then 2008, I had a lot of Georgian friends. All my Georgian friends kind of left, and I was kind of on two sides at that time, but I was kind of more like on the Russian side. I was like, oh, Georgia's kind of invaded South Ossetia. They're sticking up for the little guy. But by 2014, I was fully immersed. But just before that, in about 2012, I saw an advert. An advert was for volunteers for Conservative Party Friends of Russia. So I was like, well, that seems quite interesting. So I applied and I didn't hear anything. I was like, oh, not so good. So I went along to their kind of meeting, met all the kind of people kind of involved, and then just regularly kind of attended their meetings. And eventually they asked me to volunteer, and they moved over to what's called the Westminster Russia Forum, and I came kind of deputy chair responsible for kind of religious and kind of disability. But what was interesting there was suddenly I was really immersed in the kind of the upper echelons, I suppose, of British society and Russian society, and the two things merging kind of together. So you get invites to the Russian embassy and be very, very lavish in his private kind of residence. And you'd have lots of politicians there, conservative politicians, a lot of kind of UKIP politicians, and they kind of stayed even after 2014 and were regularly going. But you had a lot of businessmen, lawyers. Everyone was kind of chasing the Russian kind of money. And I think that's quite interesting in 2012 because that was still after UKOS, right? And still after that was after kind of Pussy Riots and after the clampdown. So still things, and so there's lots of signs. By 2014, I was totally kind of radicalized. So I was believing all the kind of narratives, and the narratives. This is a kind of a coup. It's kind of a NATO encroachment. It's a battle between kind of East and West. This idea of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine, kind of one nation, which kind of comes from the church. But I think the biggest one got me that I was brought up in a very hardcore far right area in London. So the people I knew were people like Combat 18, which is one of the most extreme kind of radical groups in pubs, and I always hated them, always disliked them. And as soon as I was hearing, okay, right sector are now taking control of the government, it was like, well, now the far right are now taking control of of the Ukrainian government. So I was believing all this kind of myths. And I think two things kind of happened at that time. My media bubble shrunk down, so I was essentially personally just watching RT, listening to Graham Phillips, Patrick Lancaster. And in many ways, I've come to Graham Phillips because I was groomed in a way by kind of Graham Phillips. So I was listening to those guys, and then and then at the same time, some of the mainstream media would be repeating the narratives. So they say that it's an East-West battle. They'd say, about right sector. So they kind of filtered out. So you start believing that it's kind of true. And in terms of Graham Phillips, so I kind of just started following him on kind of online. I thought this is an interesting guy. He's not kind of feels like a kind of truth seeker. Feels like he's telling the truth about Donbass. I've been to kind of Donbass. I was like, well, this is kind of Donbass is being kind of persecuted. You learn this. You're taught this genocide, and he's showing these true videos. So I kind of contacted him, and we kind of stayed in touch. And he said, "Can you organise my event in London?" So I said, "Okay, I'll organise your event in London." He said, "Because you know everyone in the kind of Russian circle." So I met him in London, and we actually ended up kind of falling out. What's interesting, which I spoke to Byline Times, is he was actually expelled. So he was arrested in Ukraine and kicked into Poland. And when he was kicked into Poland, he had no money, and he called straight up the Russian embassy to give him money to get back with the contact there. So he told me that kind of personally. So he's got deep rooted kind of connections. So this was kind of my journey, and then I kind of become a troll. And I was like, well, I'm going to troll all the famous people, Luke Harding, Edward Lucas, especially. So I just carried on kind of trolling lots of different kind of people. There's an American guy I trolled as well, but I can't remember who he was. He's to do with Khodorkovsky's magazine, quite Michael something. But anyway, I trolled him as well. So I trolled all these kind of people. Michael Weiss. So I was trolling them and kind of trolling them kind of constantly. Michael Wise would write about me, so I trolled him a little bit kind of more. And then what happened was I trolled Edward Lucas so many times. He said, "Will you debate me?" I was like, "Okay." I was like, "I believe in what I said. I believe this is the truth." I said, "I'll debate you." So I met up with him to discuss the debate, and we had a kind of discussion. I was like, "Okay, we set the date." And I went around. I had about 3 months, so I went away, read, and I was like, well, okay, to debate him, I've got to know what he's going to say. So I need to read his books. So I started reading his books and started reading Luke Harding's books and started reading what the interpreter said and what Michael Wise was saying. And I started thinking, now I'm really, really confused, right? Because I don't really know what the truth is anymore. So it's like, so I said to Edward, right, I'm not going to debate you. I'm religious. I'm just going to believe in God and just have a quiet life and pray. What's interesting about that position is that's where Putin wants you. Putin doesn't want advocates. He wants people just to think, I don't know what the truth is. I'm so kind of confused. I'm just going to kind of give up and just live my own life and not get involved in civil society. So I went to the debate he did, and it was with the woman called Aretha from Chatham House, and they were debating some other people on the other side, and they were just brilliant. I kind of walked out saying, "Right now, I definitely think I'm on your side and believing you, but I'm still not kind of sure." And there's no silver bullet out of kind of radicalization. It takes time. And then I started doing. I'm a qualitative researcher, so I was doing focus groups on why the white working class voted for Brexit, doing work about the far right, doing work around Islamophobia, doing work around the manosphere, and I was like, shit, all this stuff is kind of joining up, and I'm kind of believing all these kind of narratives. And then Salisbury happened, which was an attack on kind of English kind of soil. I used to go to Belarus, and they did the clampdown in Belarus. And then COVID, actually, this is one thing I've never really talked about. COVID kind of kept me away from a lot of things, so I wasn't going to the church anymore, right? So it kind of did that kind of distance. And then I just saw the church go nuts and explode, where it's like, this is all Bill Gates, it's Motorola, this is the devil coming. And suddenly I was starting to notice all these links between kind of naturalists on one side that kind of believe in kind of yoga and everything else, the church on Russian Orthodox Church, the manosphere, far left, far right, everything kind of coming together. And I noticed it before, even in 2014 in London. You'd have Graham Phillips, and you'd have with him the far right, and you'd also have the far left and the Marxist library together at a protest with people from the Russian Orthodox Church. So Marine Laurel talks about the horseshoe, but it's also Marine Laurel talks about the white, red, brown alliance, which is the Russia's really kind of good at kind of fomenting. So after that, I was kind of still, I spoke out a little bit more about it, and then when the war escalated 3 years ago, and they bombed my friends in Mariupol, which was a city I loved, I declared war on Russia and said, I'm going to do everything in my small power to help. So I've worked with hundreds of journalists, telling them, talking about information, talk about kind of propaganda, given two-thirds of my business profits, about £80,000 to Ukrainian charities, made a documentary on Ukraine and speak at the rallies, speak at Parliament, and just speak out to try and kill these kind of Hydra's heads, because they're becoming more and more kind of powerful, and it's going to get worse.
Thank you so incredibly much for that, Stephen. I'm so glad you guys got to hear his story firsthand, and there's so much to mine there. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, in my studies of, fascism, Nazi Germany, countries that, go authoritarian, whatever you want to call it, they often pick on the marginalized. And in America, we're seeing what happened, where they started with picking on trans people. And in Nazi Germany, of course, they marginalized people with disabilities. And I know you said that you originally thought you could bridge that gap. And
Yeah,
how do you feel now about the way Russia treats people who have disabilities? I know you also said that you're neurodiverse. We
yeah.
often, the guys I work with are neurodiverse. We often talk about how that sometimes is sort of a pathway to radicalization where they actually try to target people with neurodiversity. So can you speak a little bit about those issues before the guys jump in?
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of disability, that Russia's going to be like Afghanistan again, which is why I'm doing a big paper at the moment about Ukraine and disability, because Ukraine has to be the opposite. It has to be the best place in the world for its heroes, because Russia that doesn't care, and Russia's still got uses a lot of the religious stuff. Oh, you're disabled, you're going to be in heaven, right? But you need to suffer on this earth, which is the way that they talk. Not disabled, anyone, right? That's the way they talk. This is your suffering, right? And then you'll have the rewards, which is a way to kind of clamp down and keep people in the box. And Russia's based on othering, which is something I saw. It's first it was the Chechens, yeah, then it was the oligarchs, then it was the Georgians, then it was the Ukrainians, then it was LGBT. Right, never ends. He has it's constant cycle of an enemy. You have to have an eternal enemy, otherwise your regime will collapse. And that's how Putin operates in my view. It's how Russia kind of operates, and yeah, it's just very sick.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jim.
Wow, incredibly powerful story. Thank you. Um, I wanted to ask you about empathy in this context. You seem like a very kind and caring human being. Even though we've just met, just the way you speak. Um, a lot of these narratives that we're talking about, sort of as you described with othering and scapegoating of people requires kind of a suspension of empathy, if I'm not incorrect. And I wanted to get kind of just your personal perspective on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really good. I think you're right. I think it it does. I think what it does though as well is it creates it creates an inner and outer circle, right? So you start to have empathy and connection only with your tribe, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So it draws you down. So I lost a lot of my friends, a lot of my Western friends, even my family wouldn't really talk to me, right? They thought I was mad because I was in a cult. So what it does is strips you off that, but then you're still searching for belonging. So it kind of so you have empathy within the tribe, but you don't have empathy for outside. And I think that then becomes the battle for the kind of inner versus the outer, and you feel the world is against you. And the more that you feel the world is against you, the more you feel that everyone outside it is against you, or you feel that it's the matrix or supreme being, or, it's the kind of elites that are kind of maneuvering it. So I think you have empathy, but it's only a limited empathy with people within your kind of tribe. And even if you care about someone else, you'll still be like, yeah, but they're not Orthodox, they're not going to go to heaven, right? It's kind of that kind of limiting mindset is very
Dehumanization is a word for it,
dehumanization.
right?
Yeah,
Is
it is, and it cuts you off like a cult. So you do find you kind of slipping into that kind of thing where you just you see everyone else as being kind of
uh,
negative, not necessarily with anger. It can be with pity as well. It's like, oh, they're the poor people. They're the people who've kind of been fooled, right? So
yeah.
in many ways, I think what Russian propaganda does is a mirror, right? So it's all the things they just reflect onto everyone else. And this is what I was talking to Heidi about. It's like, the whole thing about the manosphere and everything else, the manosphere, the far right, the far left, where it all goes is this idea of a matrix, this propaganda elites. That's Putin and Trump, right?
Yep,
That's them. And
exactly.
let's flip it. Let's be honest. They are the matrix, right? They are the elites, right?
Yeah. And
They're the elites using ordinary people, right? And spreading propaganda.
yeah, we have the same here. In fact, I would assert that this exact effect is what turned our government into into unfortunately what we're seeing right now. And thank you again for this perspective because I think it's going to be really important for a lot of our people to see somebody who has gone through the process and come out the other side as a human being still, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to need a lot of that around the world. So thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Jim, too. And also you hit on so many things that are so important. The trauma that you were feeling about the loss of your mother and how that makes you vulnerable to these cultic tactics, but also the shame that people go through when they come out. They don't automatically just, reemerge as themselves. There's this period of time where they have to like kind of, like you said, sort of do sort of some introspection on how they got there. So I just wish everybody who was a keyboard warrior right-wing troll had to read Edward Lucas in order to like, I mean, the fact
Yeah,
that you
great.
chose,
He completely kind of changed my life. I think I
that's
think it's
beautiful.
I think it's interesting, though, look, because I come from kind of advertising. I think I had misconceived ideas, but they were quite genuinely right. I believe they were kind of sincere. But there's a shitload of mercenaries, and as this spreads, you see the mercenaries So you're seeing this kind of new right emerge of intellectualism, right? They don't believe it. They're just jumping on any bandwagon, right? They're just jumping on these kind of bandwagons because they want essentially power. And that's what I saw a lot in 2012 was the amount of politicians, businessmen, lawyers, PR people just floating around the Russian government, right? And they'd float again, right? Tomorrow. And that's
Yeah,
where they've got no ethics. They've got no ethics.
that's right.
They'd be there tomorrow. If there's gas deals, they'd be there tomorrow, right? If the sanctions were
Thank.
lifted, they'd be there tomorrow. And that's the
Oh,
problem. There's no
yeah.
ethics. And I think we talked about it yesterday, Heidi. And I think I love history, and I think Tom Holland talks about how Julius Caesar and Mark Antony basically were the oligarchs, and they used to use the plebs, talk about bread and feeding, right, against the republics, against Cicero, against the liberals. We're having that battle again, right? We're having that battle is now reoccurring. That is the battle we're facing. We've got the
Absolutely.
oligarchs trying to do a fake alliance with the working class, right? Against liberalism, against the republicanism, right? Of liberalism, of decent ideas.
And I have another question for you on that topic, but hi-fi, you jump in.
So the point you made about being pulled into the church because of your grief is such a big one for so many people I've talked to who were pulled into this Russian propaganda, QAnon, Trump is the savior, right-wing politics, Russia is third Rome, all of that.
Yep.
That grief is really, but the thing that really kind of interests me about your story, you were a troll.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the addiction of trolling and that dopamine rush
Ah, no,
you
there is.
would
Yeah,
get?
no, it's true. It's true. It's true. It's you do get
It's
the
addictive.
yeah. And you get that feeling of righteousness. Yeah, it's it. It's like I've called him the one thing that I think's really got him like a Cold War dinosaur. I'm really impressed. I'm really proud that I've used that term. You probably never even read it, right, Edward Lucas? He probably don't like it's just stupid, but you do, yeah, and you chase it, right? And the weird thing is, you're completely different person to how you'd be in the real world, and I think that's a big difference as well. I think you just lose the kind of pleasure, and you just become very kind of righteous, and yeah, you feel you're kind of a warrior, and a warrior to kind of yeah, defend the kind of cause.
Yeah, also that whole community, I've done a lot of work investigating people who got wrapped up in Alex Jones narratives and, calling people who lost children in gun violence, crises actors. And they literally are in this like community of people who all are radicalized the same way. So they sort of
Yep.
feed on each other. And it's very sinister because again, as we spoke about previously, the people pushing the narratives know these are lies. They're very aware of the lies. There are many reasons why they do it, but the people on the receiving end are unaware of that until, like you, they may have as kind of a spiritual awakening. And I'm so grateful again for all the support of Ukraine because it all goes back to Ukraine. I have two quick things for you, and I'm sure the guys may have one or two other questions. But for me, you said something incredibly important last time we spoke. You said that the problem that you're seeing with the pro-democracy forces, the liberal forces, they are still trying to message to people's heads. And you
Yep.
said what the right is doing so incredibly well and the Putinists are doing so incredibly well is messaging to people's hearts. And can you say a few words about that? Because
Yeah.
I think until we figure out how to get out of that kind of, rubric, we're
I
going
think,
to
I
be
think,
here in a world of pain.
I think there's several things, right? So I think there's three communication things that the right of Putin's kind of understand. First one is that most politics is emotion. So they go for feeling, right? So they go for a feeling and targeting someone in terms of a kind of feeling. And most people make decisions, even politics, is based on a feeling. So even Brexit. So people might be, okay, I vote Brexit because I don't just anti-immigration, but it might be some people vote even on another side because they believe in liberalism, right? So that's kind of there. So I think the other thing they do is they give very, very simple answers to very, very complicated questions. Like Jordan Peterson, right? So to solve masculinity, you just need to make your bed, right? Simple orders about people when they're lost, right? well, actually, what we don't teach people is actually the world's complex, and we should embrace and love complexity. So because we can't do the same as them, so we can't do simple answers because the world isn't kind of simple. So I think that's the other thing. Then the other thing I think they do very, very well is they ignore the present. So like there's a very, very bright future, which is hope. And it's just like the past that made you feel safe and secure. And the present's awful, right? So I think that's for me is the levers that they play really, really well. And I think we need ways to counter that. And I think one is understanding we need better emotional messaging. We need the right kind of messaging to hit the right kind of people at the right kind of time to kind of counter it. I think we've got to understand that most people at the moment are in security and belonging needs and not in self-actualization. So they're not going to self-actualize. So we've got to show people how they can belong, how they can be part of something, and how they can kind of get along, and how their security needs can be met. And I think till we do that, then we're going to keep losing the battle. But the Liberals they like a rational argument. And people don't care about rational arguments. When I did the work on Brexit, no one cared about the rational arguments at all. And Remain would do up things like, well, you'll be £10,000 better off if we stay in the EU, but it's too big a number. But what Leave did is they broke it down to you'd be £5 a day better off, right? The cup of a coffee. So they put it into small things that people can then relate to.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. My last question, and then gentlemen, please feel free to jump in with any final questions. I feel that one of my heartaches is I've been fighting this battle to get people to understand the Trump-Russia alignment for a decade, and I had written about Trump's criminality the decade preceding that. So it's been a long road for me, but I am shocked every day that people who are out protesting, still believe in democracy, do not see the head of the Hydra, do not see Putin's hand in any of this. No matter how much information we put in front of them, they still see tinfoil when you talk about Russia. And obviously, you saw the connections. You were right there in the lead up to Brexit. You saw all of it. Is there anything you might be able to say for an American audience to help them understand what just happened to their country?
I think it's really hard because it's been there for a long time, right? And you've got to get people to sit up and listen and kind of take that messaging in. And I think you just got to keep showing it and just keep kind of pushing the messages. But it does get hard. It's like, what more can we say? It's like Putin's corrupt, right? It's like Navalny's shown loads of that. Like Ukraine showed he's a murderer, right? All the butchers showed that. So much things showed that. I mean, it's running out of messages. What are the messages of kind of connection? And that's it's hard. It's hard to see. I mean, personally, I think they will fall out with each other, and that's when it will come out, right? Because you can't see Elon Musk, Trump, and Putin all being buddy for long, right? It's just not going to happen, and that's when it will start coming out into the wash. We saw that with the riots in London. In the UK, we had big race riots for the first time, and what was interesting is you had Nigel Farage, Andrew Tate, and Tommy Robinson, and at first they were all unified, and then they all started blaming each other. So, and it was like a game of chess, right? So that's what you're going to hope for, because I don't know how many more messages we can put out about Trump, right? Safe from bankruptcy by oligarchs, right? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, how much more do we have to tell people?
Every
So,
week.
yeah,
Thank you for
but
that.
we just
Jim or
got to keep
hi-fi?
banging the drum. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about in America, the one of the projects of the right is to destroy the separation of church and state. As I understand it, basically the Russian Orthodox Church is just an arm of Russian intelligence, and in many ways Kirill himself
Yep.
as a former KGB
Yep.
agent. So I wanted to just ask you a little bit about your experience of how they insert this sort of geopolitical ideology in what is supposed to be, about God and worship nominally.
They do it in different ways. They obviously they do it quite kind of subtly by just pushing the narratives. We're one nation, right? That's it. We're brothers. It's like even when the war escalated 3 years ago, you got some bishops saying, "Look, I'm really against war, and it's a fraternal war." Now, when they use the word fraternal war, that means they're buying Russian narrative, right? Because that means you're saying it's one nation. So straight away, you can see through the narrative they kind of use. So they use that. A lot of it's wrapped up in the past and the glory of the past, the glory of the Tsars, the glory of kind of imperialism, the mighty kind of Russia, Dostoevsky. So all these kind of levers they will kind of use. But behind that, there's something more sinister. So there's something called the Frilov leaks, and it's worth looking at. And those leaks, it was a strategist for the Russian Orthodox Church, and basically he's got maps of every country in Europe and what messaging we should do. So about traditions. So Swedish, well, the message we should put here is they're into bestiality, right? And literally, it's got different kind of messages. There's there's emails about how he wants to tie with Pat McCann in the US, right? And the World Family Congress. There's messages there literally talking about a conservative MP, ex-conservative MP, and oh, he's quite religious. I think we can get him into the church and we can work on him and we can form a traditional unit. So it's all there. I mean, it's there. I mean, it's black and white, which is why a lot of countries are trying to ban it. I mean, it's understandable.
We have the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia here
Yeah, yeah,
still,
yeah. That well,
which is
I was on the
which
parish
is
council. I was on the parish council for that as well. So,
oh boy. I mean, here it's just it's a factory for traditional
yeah.
Nazis. I mean, frankly, there are a lot of just neo-Nazis coming out of there.
And
Uh,
also a lot of the converts, lot of people converting to Russian Orthodox Church abroad, right?
yeah,
And a lot of them are men, young
yeah.
men,
No,
right?
exactly.
Stigma males. It's stigma males, right? It's territory. It's hardcore territory, and
That's
it's
right.
it's gonna be a massive problem, and it's leading into the Orthodox bros, right? And it's a big problem. It's a big problem. It's like you said, it's a connection. It's a big connection with the far right conspiracy theories. It's all merging into one, and it's all coming from the Russian Orthodox Church.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Hi-Fi, one final question for you, and then one final for me, and then we will let this gentleman go.
One of the things that Russia constantly threatens is we're going to have World War III if you don't let us have our way with Ukraine.
Mhm.
I would argue that World War III started in 2014 when they invaded Crimea, and their attacks, these hybrid warfare, cognitive warfare, information warfare, call them whatever you want, warfare, this soft warfare was also spread globally to the
Yep.
UK, to the United States, to France through Le Pen, to, I mean, the list goes on, Orban, Lukashenko, you name it, right? Do you agree or disagree that we are already in World War
And we
III?
are. I think, and some people say it's 2012 when Putin kind of come back and the idea of Ruski Mir, and that's when it kind of spread. But those ideas have been boiling up for years before. It's really interesting when you look at if you look at the Stroker, the who was fighting in Donbass, right? So Strelkov, the kind of the one who got arrested recently in kind of Russia. You look at the president, who's another guy who's the president of the Donetsk Republic. They're all best friends with Metropolitan Tikhon, right? Who's meant to be Putin's confessor. They're best friends. They're all the same circle, and they've been talking about this since 2002. So this has been planned, right? This has been planned for a long time, and I think democracies, we like the 24-hour news cycle, right? And democracies are great, but we don't look to the long game, right? And Russia and China have played this kind of long game, and we don't. And we get rid of our Russian specialists because suddenly we think they're a friend, right? So we don't monitor them anymore. And it's a big problem because
It's
this has
just, you
been going
just
on for a
made,
long time.
no, you just made me think about how three of the biggest specialists on this topic fled to or left for Canada, Jason Stanley and Marcy Shore and Tim Snyder. So you're absolutely
I
100%
really,
correct.
I didn't know Schneider gone. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Wow,
Tim Snyder's working in Canada now. He has
he's
both he
amazing,
and his wife are on leave from
amazing,
Yale,
amazing.
and
Yeah, amazing.
they're
Wow.
yeah, all of them. So it's just this whole thing. You're so right about the long game and how we are so often just playing whack-a-mole with the news horror events of the day. So my last
We're playing
question,
catch up all the time, right?
all the time.
We're not leading policy and strategy. We're just playing catch
No.
up. That's it.
Yes. So you've given us such a brilliant interview. I'm so grateful that we were able to all be here and share this together. And my last thing for you is obviously we've done so much reporting from sources in Ukraine, from soldiers in Ukraine, those who are advocating cultural attaches, our friend Zarina Zabriskie, who has been there for the last 3 years. And you obviously help part of how you came out of the cult, this Russian propaganda cult, was really looking and seeing what was happening in Ukraine. And is there anything you can say? Because again, there seems to be some kind of block in America and in the West on how freaking important it is that Ukraine has the resources it needs to defeat Russia. Is there any line or two that you think could be helpful for us to share with our viewers on why it's so important?
Because they're fighting for our democracy and they're fighting for our freedom. And they're the vanguard, right? They're the vanguard that are supporting us. And if Ukraine falls, there will potentially be World War III, right? It will kind of continue because they will then move into kind of other areas, or China will move. Someone will move because it will show the kind of weakness. And I think the most important thing we can do is we just need to keep listening to Ukraine voices. We need to amplify those kind of voices, and we've kind of lost that a little bit. And I think that's sad. And I think we've got to remember this is a country. It's not a small country. This is a country of 40 million. This is a country of 40 million people. It's huge, right? It's a big country. It's a big scale. It's not just some toy in an imperialistic game between Trump and Russia, right? It's got its independence. And when Ukraine is independent, and when in the future when Ukraine is strong, that is when the world will be strong because it will act as a buffer.
Thank you so much, Stephen Lacey, for this brilliant interview. We're so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Lovely
Steve.
to meet you.
Thanks.